Miss Melissa with the Oosterhout Free Library and more tall tales of Paul Bunyan by Del J. McCormick. You're not going to believe some of this stuff. This first one is called Johnny Inkslinger and His Magic Pen. One day a visitor asked Paul, "How many men are in the camp?" Paul didn't know. There was Hot Biscuit Slim, his 200 cooks, Old the Big Swede, Tiny Tim, and hundreds more. Paul tried to count them one day at dinner, but they kept coming and going for hours. He asked Cream Puff Fatty how many desserts he had made. 8,000, said Cream Puff Fatty. Good, said Paul, so we know there's 8,000 men. Nope, said Cream Puff Fatty, because some of the men don't eat desserts, and Old the Big Swede eats 7, except when we have strawberry shortcake, then he eats 10. So Paul gave up even trying to count the men, and sent for Johnny Inkslinger to do the arithmetic for the camp. Johnny Inkslinger was the best bookkeeper in the North Woods, a tall, sad-looking man with a bald head. He always wore a large pair of eyeglasses perched at the end of his long, thin nose. He added and subtracted and multiplied endless rows of figures day and night. He became the fastest bookkeeper in the world and never made a mistake. One night he counted all the stars in the sky and never missed one. Johnny Inkslinger kept track of everything, even down to the last kernel of corn in the kitchens. His magic pen never ran out of ink. A long rubber hose connected it to a 10-gallon barrel of ink, and that's how the fountain pen was invented. Johnny Inkslinger wrote so fast that the barrel of ink had to be filled every 2 days. "You're using too much ink," Paul said one day. "We can't buy it fast enough." So Johnny Inkslinger thought of a plan. He quit dotting his I's and crossing his T's, and from then on saved 9 gallons of ink a week. Johnny Inkslinger invented new ways of adding and subtracting that are used to this day. He wrote every number down twice, so not to make a single mistake. He also invented the mistake eraser. This is a large rubber sponge to be rubbed over a page of figures. It erased only the mistakes and left all the rest of the figures as they were. Boy, I really wish I had one of those. Johnny finally had no use for it, as he made no mistakes. He gave it to Hot Biscuit Slim. Hot Biscuit Slim used it for a while, but he never liked it. The magic sponge erased almost every figure he made. He gave it to Old the Big Swede. Old tried it just once, and it erased the whole sheet of paper until there was only blank space where all the figures had been made. It seemed Old was very poor at arithmetic, and no matter how many times he added 2 and 2, it always came out 6. Johnny Inkslinger once tried to figure out how much it cost to feed Babe the big blue ox, but he finally had to give up. Every time he added up the figures, he found Babe had eaten another barnful of hay. This made him so angry that he told Paul he would quit doing arithmetic forever. Nonetheless, Johnny Inkslinger remained with Paul during all his years of adventures in the woods. The strange sickness of Babe the blue ox. The blue ox was always a favorite around camp. In spite of his great size, he was always playing jokes on the men. One day, Cream Puff Fatty was out fishing in a lake. Just for a joke, Babe drank it dry while Fatty was rowing for shore. Imagine how silly the fat little cook looked trying to row a boat on dry land. Finally, Paul hired Brimstone Bill to take care of Babe. Bill wasn't as tall as Old the Big Swede, but he was wider than he was tall, and very strong and active for his age. He was well over 60 years old, and could leap in the air and kick the ceiling with both feet. He had the hobnails in the soles of his shoes made to form his initials. Every time he kicked the ceiling of the bunkhouses, he left his initials, B.B., and you can find marks of them there to this day. Paul told him to try to keep Babe out of mischief. If left to himself, Babe would eat everything in sight. If Cream Puff Fatty put some pies out to cool, Babe would eat them all. He loved hot cakes best of all, and could eat them faster than Hot Biscuit Slim and his cooks could make them on the kitchen stove. One day, this fondness for hot cakes was the cause of trouble for Babe. No one knew just how it happened, but Brimstone Bill noticed that Babe hardly touched his turnips at dinner one night. The next morning, the blue ox groaned and rolled his eyes in pain. "Babe is sick," called Brimstone Bill. "Somebody call Johnny Inkslinger." Johnny was the only one at camp who knew how to cure sickness of any kind. He arrived a few minutes later with a suitcase full of pills. Babe swallowed the pills, suitcase and all, but it didn't seem to do any good. "Open your mouth and say, 'Ah!'" Johnny said. Babe did as he was told. "Just as I thought," said Johnny. "His throat is all red and swollen." So they poured 25 barrels of cough medicine down his huge throat. It was no use. Babe became sicker. Johnny Inkslinger was desperate. "We'll lower 6 men down into his mouth with ropes to find the trouble," he said. He told the men to take lanterns along and explore every inch of the way and keep on going until they found the cause of the trouble. Soon they had built a huge scaffold and lowered the men down into Babe's mouth. Down they went past great white teeth, sliding and crawling down his rough tongue. They went down the huge passage that led to his stomach. It grew dark. Johnny Inkslinger led the way with his lantern. On and on they went until they came to the door at the entrance of Babe's stomach. "Stay here, men," said Johnny, "and I'll crawl in, see if I can find anything." In the center of the stomach was a great black object. Johnny Inkslinger called the men together and they tied ropes around it. Then he gave 3 quick jerks on the rope, which was the signal for the men to pull him out. Babe, in his fondness for hotcakes, had become greedy. He had eaten the hotcakes, stove and all. The stove was hot, so of course it gave him indigestion. In a few days Babe was well again, but it was a great lesson for him. Never again did he put his head in the kitchen when the cooks were not around, and from then on he never ate another hot cake. Our last Paul Bunyan story is called "The Mountain That Stood on Its Head." Paul Bunyan decided to move further into the woods. The men wanted to stop there and cut the large trees. "No," said Paul, for he had heard of a wonderful white pine forest. Many strange sights they saw as they pushed on through the mountains. There were shovel-tailed beavers that built dams in the streams. Their tails were shaped like shovels, and they could build a dam in a few minutes. Hot Biscuit Slim caught 6 of them and used the beavers to dig holes near the kitchen to bury the prune stones that were left after breakfast. They saw a stiff-legged deer with no joints in their legs. These strange animals could not lie down. They slept standing on their feet, leaning against the trees. They caught several of these by sawing the trees almost in two. When the deer would lean against them, the trees would topple over, and so would the deer. Naturally, the deer couldn't get up and were easily captured. Brimstone Bill caught a side-hill goat. This animal is probably the rarest of all mountain goats. The legs on one side are much shorter than the legs on the other. He travels around on the steep side of the mountains as if he were on level ground. Brimstone Bill made a pet of his hillside goat, and he never got lost or ran away from camp. Because of short legs on one side, he always ran on a circle when on level ground. The men also found some sundotters. These strange birds laid their eggs on the shady side of a mountain. The eggs, instead of being round, are square, so they won't whirl down the steep mountainsides. In the center of the wilderness, they came upon the strangest sight they had ever seen. A huge mountain appeared before them, but instead of the peak being in the clouds, it was on the ground. The base of the mountain became wider as it left the ground like a huge ice cream cone. "The mountain that stood on its head!" cried Paul, as they saw the vast forest of white pines growing down towards the earth from the side of the mountain. "No one has ever cut these trees because they're growing upside down." This didn't stop Paul Bunyan, however. He immediately built a camp on the edge of the mountain. Then he called Johnny Inkslinger to him. "Here's a new problem for you. How are we going to log off the white pine trees that are growing upside down from the sides of the mountain?" Johnny Inkslinger took off his glasses and thought and thought. He thought of 700 different ways of cutting down the trees, but none of them would work. Finally, he had old the big Swede build a great cannon and load it with gunpowder and iron cannonballs. When it was ready, they shot the cannonballs through the trunks of the trees, and they dropped upside down onto the ground with a loud crash. But the tops of the trees were pointed like arrows, and they plunged into the earth and disappeared from sight. Paul finally had to give the plan up. They worked all summer without being able to get a single log. Paul was in despair. No task was too large or too difficult for Paul and his men, but they were defeated so far by the mountain that stood on its head. It was Tiny Tim, the water boy, who finally thought of a way. "Why not lasso the trees with ropes like the cowboys do?" said Tim, who had been reading cowboy stories. Paul combed his beard with a young pine tree as he sat thinking about what Tiny Tim had said. "Not a bad idea," said Paul. So they sent to Montana for some cowboys, who arrived at the camp with their long lariats. The lariats are ropes that the cowboys use to lasso cows and horses. In a short time the air was full of swinging ropes as the cowboys looped them around the tops of the trees. They tied the lariats to Babe, the blue ox, and Babe pulled the trees out by the roots. Then the cowboys climbed the mountain, hanging to the upside-down trees by their knees like monkeys, and lassoed other trees. In a month, Paul had logged all the white pine trees off one side of the mountain. The weight of the trees on the other side caused the mountain to fall over on its side with a great crash that could be heard for miles and miles. The force of the mountain falling started a huge tidal wave in the Pacific Ocean, which destroyed 60 fishing villages in Japan. That is why the geographies no longer show the strange mountain that stood on its head. I'll see you again soon with another way to imagine your story. Remember, the library building is open now. We have our summer reading program online, and you can still call for no contact pickup. So please take advantage of everything we have here at the Oosterhout Free Library. Bye-bye.